Petty apartheid versus grand apartheid. Petty apartheid is the practice of segregation in the routine of daily life, such as in lavatories, restaurants, railway cars, buses, swimming pools, and other public facilities. One example of petty apartheid is during the Separate Amenities Act of 1954. In this act, the usage of the same facilities was not allowed. The act was put into place so that different races didn't have to interact. Because of this law, the natives were forced to use amenities that were not equal to the ones that the Afrikaners were using. Even though the act stated that they had to use different amenities, they did not have to be equal. Another example is the Native Laws Amendment Act. This act called for the removal of the majority of natives in the urban areas in South Africa. Only some natives were allowed to stay if they worked in the area, while others must use passes and only stay in the cities for short periods of time. One exception is stated in Section 10 that if you lived in the city for more than 15 years or have worked for the same employer in the urban area for more than 10 years, you could live there with no time constraint. But for everyone else, they were only allowed for 72 hours or less in the urban areas.
Grand apartheid is a form of apartheid prevalent in the 1960s and 1970s that involved comprehensive racial segregation and measures such as the removal of black people from white areas and the creation of black homelands. So in this, there are two laws that relate to the Grand Apartheid. One of them being the Population Registration Act of 1950 and the other Group Areas Act of 1950. The Population Registration Act of 1950 was the classification of races in South Africa that allowed for authorities to do the pencil and hair test on people, and through this, the population was distributed, and many people were reclassified with this, resulting to many families being split because of their hair texture. When someone's hair was more frizzy, they had to be classified in the black class, which was affected through the Groups Areas Act of 1950, which allocated people to different places given their class. And the four classes were black, white, Indian, and colored. In the Group Areas Act, it was an imposition of control of ownership of land and buildings in South Africa and led to the distribution of races. When there was a classification of race, that race was relocated. For the native South Africans, that meant that they were relocated to townships that were outside of urban areas, since whites felt that they posed a threat on making more money and being in higher class position.
The Defiance Campaign was a large-scale, multi-racial group aimed towards fighting against apartheid laws within South Africa. There are several examples in which the campaign has taken a stance against the unjust laws whites were forcing upon natives. For example, a protest which occurred during the 1980s, where hundreds of thousands of Africans who were banned from white-controlled areas ignored the Separate Amenities Act of 1954 and flooded into forbidden regions as well as entities, such as bathrooms. Another example would be the Sharpeville Massacre, where natives protested the Group Areas Act of 1950, refusing to use their passports. Some even protested this act by burning their passbooks in order to show their opinion in which natives should not be segregated into specific areas, nor should they be prevented from going wherever they wanted to.